This is my first sermon for quite a while, and I started preaching 47 years ago. I'm hopefully getting better and better as time goes by. But our story today is the story about Abraham being told that he's going to have a son. Now, Genesis 21 is a very, very personal story, and it's also a very, very big story. It's about the struggle of a childless couple who are promised a child, but it takes decades to get an answer. And the big picture is that God is going to start the chosen people of God through Abraham. We're reminded about the small picture in terms of Luke 12 verse 7. Even the hairs on your head are numbered. Fear not, you're more valuable than the sparrows. As you see, I've been trying to make jobs easier by not having hair in my head. And so the small picture of our life, God looks after the small details. But also God looks after the big picture. So in Job 28:24, God looks to the ends of the earth and he sees everything. Everything under the heavens. So God is in the small detail, but he's also in the big picture. Now we often struggle with what God is doing in our lives. God lives in a world where not one or two people are sinful, but the whole world is sinful. And so God trying to juggle and control our world is like a man trying to nail jelly to a tree. It is very, very hard. So in this world, God juggles and seeks to fulfill his will, but it's in a sinful world. So let's explore together what's it like to be a longing, childless couple of Abraham and Sarah. Let's turn now to Genesis. Have you got your Bibles handy? Let's get some background. Now, Genesis starts with a big picture story. So if you go back to Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it moves from that point there to mankind. So Genesis 1:27. So God created human beings in his own image. Then God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth and govern it or manage it. Humanity flourishes, but so does sin. That leads to God having a new start through Noah. So we turn to Noah chapter 6 verse 9. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless man living on earth at the time. And he walked in close fellowship with God. Then in Genesis 6:11, now God saw the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. So God said to Noah, I've decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled our earth with violence. The flood comes, and after the flood we have a brand new start. With the same words that were said to Adam and Eve. Then God blessed Noah in Genesis 9:1 and his sons, and it said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. So the covenant to Adam and Eve was repeated back to Noah. Then in Genesis 9 verse 8, then God said, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and with your descendants. What is a covenant? A covenant is a relationship definition of our relationship with God. Now, in modern times, the most popular covenant is that of a marriage. And the marriage is of two who become one. And that type of covenant is a clear way of how God defines his relationship with us. He describes it as a covenant or a contract relationship. So in there, Genesis 10:11, we get Noah's family tree, and that family tree ends with a man called Abraham. So there in Genesis 11 verse 30, we see that Sarah was unable to have a child. She could not become pregnant. So why is that so important? When we get to the next chapter, chapter 12 of Genesis, which for many people is one of the most crucial Old Testament passages to really come to grasp with what it's teaching. So there in Genesis 12 verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, leave your native country, leave your relatives and your family, father's family, and go to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I'll make you famous. And you'll be a blessing to other people. I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who condemn you. Now all the families on earth will be blessed through you. And this is called the Abrahamic covenant. And the next section has Abraham leaving and travelling. And it's there's 3 promises that were given to him. But it's the third promise that is the focus of our sermon today. What's that? Genesis 12 verse 2. I will make you a great nation. So the next part is not the story of a childless couple having a child. It's the story that God is in control of everything. Job 42:2 says, I know that you can do all things, when it describes God. Or in Proverbs 19:21, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. God is indeed in control. God is in control of your life. Let's turn now to our Bible reading from today, Genesis 18, verses 1 to 15. Starts with the Lord appeared again to Abram, and Abram was just sitting in a tent. He'd do this often. And he noticed in the distance 3 men coming towards him, and he runs out to welcome them. He yells out, my Lord, if it pleases you, please stop here. And since you've honoured your servants with this visit, let us prepare some food to relish and refresh you before you continue your journey. He looked at Abram and said, all right. So Abram runs back, calls out to Sarah, hurry, bake some bread. Then Abram chooses a tender calf. And when the food was ready, he served it to the men. We turn now to Sarah, verse 9. Where is Sarah, your wife? The visitor asks. Oh, she's inside the tent. Then one of them said, I'll return to you again this time next year, and your wife Sarah will be with child. What's Abraham's reaction? Thinking, I've been childless for decades. My wife is so old. How can this be? But Genesis chapter 12 is being fulfilled. A great nation will come from Abraham. So there in Genesis 21, verse 1, the Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he promised. She becomes pregnant, she gives birth, and this happened at just the right time. What God had said has come true. So that's the small picture. A child is born. The big picture is the nation of Israel is being planted. Let's go from the Old Testament now all the way to the New Testament. Because in the New Testament we find that Abraham is mentioned over 60 times. I'm not sure whether it's either him or King David who's the most popular person who's mentioned in the New Testament. So let's turn to Romans chapter 4 verse 2. If Abram was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. So what does the scriptures say? Abraham believed God and was credited to him as righteousness. It is not Abraham's faithfulness that we're being presented with, but it is God's faithfulness that's before our eyes. Genesis tells us often of Abraham's failings, but Genesis focuses on God's faithfulness through all situations. So we see there in Genesis 17 verse 9, God said to Abram, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. Then in Genesis 18:18, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on earth will be blessed through him. As we go through the Old Testament, what do we see? The Israelites are faithless. They sin and sin and sin again. But God holds on to them in the precious palm of his hand, as God holds on to you and I. In 2 Kings 13:23, the Lord was gracious to them and had compassion, showed concern for them because of his covenant with Abraham. God keeps his promises. When I called him, he was only one man. And I blessed Abraham and I made him many. We worship a God that keeps his promises to us. Now in the New Testament, as we go there, we see in Matthew 1:1, the genealogy of Jesus, he's described as the son of Abraham. But the Bible doesn't just describe God or Jesus as the son of Abraham, but you and I as Abraham's children. So there in Matthew 3:9, and do not say we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that of all these stones, God can raise up children of Abraham. Then Luke 19:9, Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. And when the early church preached, there in Acts 3:25, and you are heirs of the prophets and of the covenant of God made with our fathers, and as he said to Abraham, through your offspring all peoples of earth will be blessed. This story focuses us to see that God is in control. You and I live in a sinful, messy world that is out to hurt you and I at times. But we should, as Christians, understand, as Abraham did, that God is faithful. In the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, verse 8, it describes Abraham. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he had received for an inheritance, and he went out. And this next line is beautiful. Not knowing where he was going. It's not as if you could say, oh, there's God's path for me. It's a sense of one step at a time. I have no idea where I'm going, but I know God's in control. You and I do not know the future, but we do know the one who holds the future. In Galatians 3 verse 8, for seeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preaching the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the nations will be blessed through you, Abraham. So what does the Bible tell us as a word or a promise for us? In Romans 8 verse 28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who have been called according to his purpose. What does it mean for you and I to have God in control? Do you realise that even your own faith was initiated by God? So back in 1 John 4 verse 19, we loved because he first loved us. Even our very faith was initiated by God. The steps we take are ordered by God. That God is faithfully looking after us through all the struggles. This Genesis story reminds us that in chaos, God can still work. In Philippians 2 verse 3, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. You and I are children of Abraham. But more importantly, we are children of God. Galatians 4:7. Therefore, you are no longer a slave, but you are a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. I have no idea what today will bring, what this week will bring for any of us. But I do know who's in control. Let's just finish in prayer.